Welcome to Next to Madison, a podcast to help you live your best life.
Welcome back to another fun episode of Next to Madison. I am your host, Madison Malloy, and on today's episode, I am sitting down with the director of the Brain Resource Center, Dr. Kamran Fallahpour. He is a fascinating individual, and he is talking all about the brain and how it works. And the brain boils down to everything that I really talk about on this podcast. What you're thinking, your confidence, how your mind and your thinking dictates your success. And he goes into the different forms of like why we feel rejected, what areas of the brain are being fired up, how can we self-regulate, how we actually have a second brain behind our gut. This is an amazing, amazing episode that is going to help you in your life. They have done years and years and years and years of research on this and exactly how the brain works, which is why they're one of the top people that many CEOs go to figure out how their brain is working to optimize performance for children suffering from things like ADHD. But there's so much in here, so I'm not going to keep talking because we've got to get into the interview. But please make sure you rate, review, subscribe, share it with your friend so we can keep bringing you more episodes that are going to make you happier, healthier, and wealthier. I appreciate every single one of you that tunes into this podcast every week or tunes in whenever. We couldn't do it without you. So I am so, so grateful. And we'll be right back after this brief message with our guest.
Hey, it's Madison Malloy. I just wanted to remind you to make sure you grab a copy of my book, Time to Lighten the Fuck Up. It is a great, funny self-help book that is going to help you get out of your own way. I have already helped thousands and thousands of people, and they are on their way to living their dream life, and I want every listener to be able to live their dream life as well. So grab a copy of the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or even the audiobook on Audible. Now back to the show.
All right, we are back with our amazing guest on this episode where we're talking all about the mind and the brain. Yes, it's going to be a fun one. So I'd like to welcome our guest, Dr. Kamran Fallahpour. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on here because you're the director of Brain Resource Center in New York and a clinical psychologist and neuroscientist. And so you have studied the mind and the brain inside out. And I talk a lot about the law of attraction and how your mind creates your reality on this podcast. I preach it. I've written books. I'm writing more books. So before we go into that, can you give us a little bit about your background and kind of what areas you're excited currently
Sure.
in this area?
Yes. So my background, as you mentioned, I'm a clinical psychologist and neuroscientist by training. So I've been involved in both neuroscience research, some research and development in the area of neurotechnology. I've done over 20 years of clinical practice using what we call neuromodulation techniques, which are interventions that are based on neuroscience that are not using pharmaceuticals to help change and shift the brain and retrain the brain based on principles of neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to really rewire and shift into a different way of functioning, if you will. Yeah.
So can you explain to us more about what neuroplasticity is?
Sure. So, we used to think that once you are an adult, your brain is kind of fixed, and that's the brain you're stuck with, so to speak. But in fact, the past few decades in neuroscience, we have learned that, in fact, our brain is capable of changing and rewiring up to our adulthood, even in older years. So in principle, neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to alter both its structure and overall functions, which may sound surprising to some people, but our brain is very malleable. Now, of course, children's brain is more malleable than adults, but even adults have a malleable brain. So let me expand on that, is that the brain is a very flexible and responsive organ. In fact, all of our learning involves brain plasticity. In other words, by the end of this conversation we have today, your brain and the brain of your audience will be somewhat different because of the information being conveyed and the learning that occurs. So our brain is constantly receiving information, filtering information, and filtering is a very important kind of tag there, because we will get to that later. And with that, our brain starts to shift its function, because certain regions, certain networks will be more or less activated based on new knowledge, auditory, visual knowledge. And then eventually, by repetition of certain learning, actual structure of the brain will change. So, so according to this theory, which now is well kind of accepted among neuroscientists, and we have evidence for it, that experience can change the brain's physical structure or anatomy and functional organization, which is its physiology. And there is a theory that is called the Hebbian theory that says that neurons that fire together wire together. Meaning that when your brain fires in a particular way repeatedly, certain networks in the brain get recruited to learn how to do that better. Think about like highways versus little kind of alleys or little dirt roads, right? So the more you travel that road, the more robust it gets. And if you travel a particular path of activation in your brain, let's say whether it's being angry, whether it's being happy, whether it is being kind of being in a learning state, you're actually activating that network more and more, so it becomes more robust. And conversely, if you stop using that pathway, it starts to lose its kind of function in the way that it used to be, because it's no longer being utilized and reinforced.
Right. So that's why reading and educating yourself, and I guess like they always tell older people, play crossword puzzles, exercise your mind, keep your mind going. So you don't lose it. Because I guess it's if you don't use it, you lose it.
Absolutely. That principle is pretty much there when it comes to the brain. And we say that in a way, it's like a muscle that when you use it, and if you don't, you start to degrade its function.
Yeah. And you brought up another thing about like consistently following certain pathways in the brain. So you brought up emotions. So if you've got anger or sadness or happiness. So let's talk about what most people seem to, have a hard time with, which is, let's just use an example, heartbreak. And they can't seem to detach from it or get over it. They keep replaying the scenarios in their mind, which keeps them in a mental prison. How does one recover from a breakup faster using the power of the mind?
Sure. So breakups are always difficult. They also trigger perhaps past experiences of loss. And depending on our attachment to caregivers, significant people in our lives, and how we've been treated as children in relationships, breakups can have a different meaning. In other words, if you've had losses in your life in the past, for whatever reason, whether it was your home environment, parental style, or other events in one's life, people who move, they lose friends, people who basically don't have a very stable home life or interpersonal life, and loss becomes a theme. Sometimes when you have a loss in a form of a breakup, it brings a flood of emotions And again, going to the brain activation,
Yeah.
it brings about a whole set of networks in the brain that are connected to the emotional centers of the brain that get activated. And those emotions can be quite powerful. So one of the ways to deal with it is to recognize whether the present moment, the current breakup, loss, whether what part of what you're feeling belongs to today and what part of it actually belongs to the past that is unresolved.
Interesting.
And sometimes very big difference in the way you can actually deal with the present.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So people will just justify their feelings like it must be this, but really, whenever you go through some sort of disappointment in your life, no matter what it is, it's teaching us a lesson and something that needs to be resolved because those memories reside in our brain until we fix them, correct?
Absolutely. Older, we can call them traumas or we can call them micro traumas, sometimes even something that shouldn't be that significant has an impact on us because of who we are, our physiology, our upbringing. But also there are key moments in our lives where maybe we are more vulnerable. And, if we recognize the impact of that person or that relationship, not only as, well, this person did this to me, or I feel lost without this person, but recognize it as a theme in human life and human growth, both from a kind of an interpersonal point of view, but also from a resiliency point of view.
Yeah.
Sometimes really give perspective, because when you think about it, in life, we have a lot of positive experiences interpersonally, but life is also full of losses. From early on, we have losses, and it continues to be. And it's something that we need to accept and allow it to be part of our life rather than something we try to avoid. So those feelings, I think, are very legitimate. And rather than kind of trying to just ignore them, we need to deal with them, pay attention to why they're there. If the intensity is so high that it doesn't make sense in the moments, like let's say someone had a breakup and now all of a sudden they can't even go to work, or they can't function as a person, or they can't be a good mother or father or a good coworker, then then we're alarmed that, okay, maybe something else is going on, because life presents many challenges like that to us, and resiliency is key.
Oh, 100%. So it kind of plays into this type part of the conversation kind of plays into so many fears that
Yes.
we have that live in our mind, and those fears, and I've been researching this and I'm probably going to do a book about it. What is the irrational fears that hold us back? And I would say one of the biggest fears, besides fearing what other people may think, is our fear of rejection.
Yes. Well, this is a very good question. And the fear of rejection and being excluded and kind of not being loved, I think it's a fear that, from a evolutionary psychology point of view, when you think about the hunter-gatherers and societies that were very primitive, when something happened and then you got rejected, what would happen? If you got rejected from your core group, support, tribe, what would happen? Most people, majority of the
You would
time,
die.
they would.
Yeah.
So that has been hardwired to our brain and to our psyche and to the emotional centers of our brain, that sometimes we irrationally believe that rejection means death. And that's a part of, the human history from an evolutionary point of view.
Yeah.
But also, we have, again, as children, in the first 7 years of life, a lot of our brain physiology, our subconscious, processing, interpersonal modeling of human relationships, all of that takes place and kind of gets gelled, so to speak. So it also had somehow experiences that were not optimal, or they were traumatizing, or we were not in a supportive environment. That could also impact our present because of that history. So we have, on the one hand, our physiological kind of evolutionary history, and then we have more like our childhood and our other experiences that all kind of revisit us in our adulthood and in these moments. And also because of our genetic makeup and our physiology, some people are just more sensitive in many ways. And there are studies on this, that in fact, some people, in fact, people come to the world with temperaments that are preset at birth that can be followed up through adulthood. So that's another part of the transaction that comes in, and that also feeds into this dynamic.
There's just, the brain is such a magnificent, confusing, amazing, hard thing to understand, but how it really dictates kind of what we get in life. Because I feel like that fear of rejection that we have from evolutionary times to now really affects our ability to be vulnerable. And when we're not vulnerable, we aren't authentically connecting and building relationships that we need because we are so afraid of that rejection. So how can one start to rewire their neural pathways to not be so afraid of rejection?
Yeah, I think that aside from obviously what we call corrective experiences, meaning that being in relationships where people are not rejecting and people are more inclusive, accepting, loving, experiencing that as an adult or even as a child or a young adult is definitely helpful in allowing us to have a better relationship with the fact that, you know, in life we are going to have rejections from time to time.
Of course.
So I think that's one component. And then the other component is, generally one of the things we teach our patients is what we call self-regulation, meaning that our ability to regulate our emotions and our physiology in face of stress, in face of disappointment, in face of rejection in this case, you know, that we have physiological responses that are very real. When you think about it, when we are upset, when we feel rejected, what happens? So there are certain physiological changes. If you actually pay attention to your own body, when you're feeling rejected, you will recognize certain parts of your physiology changing, right?
Yeah.
You know, your heart will be different, your breathing rate will be different, there'll be tension in areas. Probably in the gut, there is a feeling here, by the way, behind our gut is a bundle of neurons. We call it like a second brain. And this is so fascinating. So as you know, the brain, as you mentioned, is such a fascinating organ. In fact, it is the most complex organism that we know of in our known universe, whatever we know so far, right? It is only 2% of our body weight. It receives about 15% of our cardiac output, 20% of total body oxygen consumption. Only 2% of our body weight, but 20% of our oxygen consumption goes to our brain, and 25% of glucose utilization all goes to our brain. So it's obviously a very complex organ that controls almost everything that we know of in terms of our bodily functions, our emotions, our cognition. There are over 100 billion nerve cells, but estimated 40,000 connections for each. So really the number of connections is estimated to be more than the stars we know in our galaxy. So
Oh my
again, very connected organ. Now we also have a second brain that's behind our gut, and they talk. And that's why a lot of our physiological, what we feel in our body, with the brain, they interact. And that's very important. That's why, again, we have a gut feeling about something. Or
Yes.
when we have as you mentioned, when we have a issue in a relationship, we feel rejected, it's not only impacting our brain and our mood, but it's also impacting our body. And we feel certain sensations, tightness, or certain ways of feeling even in our body. So when going back to what I was talking about in terms of self-regulation, it is the idea of being able to better manage and regulate what happens in our physiology, what happens in our brain, and also what we feel and how we react. So one of the ways to do that is using, we use actually technologies such as brain-computer interface and other neuromodulation techniques, how to actually monitor brain states in real time and teach people how to help regulate their own physiology, their own state of mind, and actually learn how to get better at it. So that's a form of training that helps really with what we call self-regulation. And with training of that sort, not only you are rewiring the brain, but you're also optimizing your ability to react to situations, stressors, rejections in a different way.
And so now, like retraining the brain in those pathways, is this why affirmations can be so powerful?
Well, affirmations can be powerful because they kind of reinforce certain pathways that between our verbal and conceptual framework within our brain, we are reinforcing memories and perceptions of positivity or positive networks that tend to come online. Okay, so
Yeah.
think about it this way. Whenever you think about a bad memory, like let's say from childhood or an experience of rejection, let's say your first love or whatever it was that you felt disappointed or rejected, to our brain, that memory brings about the same feelings. And in fact, it is as if you are re-experiencing that again. The same chemicals, neurochemicals are released, the same activations, maybe dampened a little bit, but still the same process. So going back to brain plasticity and what we talked about, the more that kind of network is stimulated, whether it's by experiencing it again or just remembering it again or thinking about it often, we're reinforcing the same trauma. We're reinforcing the same
Oh,
kind of chemicals, neurochemical soup
yeah.
that we're preparing it again and we're consuming it again. And therefore, affirmations, for instance, one of the possible mechanisms is that you come out of that network and you activate another network of positive experiences, of memories of success, memories of networks in the brain that at some point got activated with more successful and more pleasant kind of states that now you're reinforcing that one. And if you keep reinforcing that one, the chance of getting reactivated and experiencing that becomes higher and higher.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's another. So, and when people just keep dwelling on the past, they keep those memories alive in that. So the
Uh,
affirmations can rewire to help, because that goes into like confidence, right? Like confidence is created in your mind. And obviously, it has to do with your experiences that are held in your mind. But like if somebody came to you and said, I'm really suffering with my confidence and my self-esteem. From your research of the mind, what would be your advice for them to build that up?
Yeah. So obviously, confidence often has to do with how we got reinforced for success and failure, reward and punishment, especially early on in our childhood. So again, that mechanism of being able to experiment and being able to make choices and being rewarded for it and sometimes not being rewarded for it, and the balance of that, if the balance is lopsided and the person, maybe because of their environment, maybe because of some limitations they had, maybe because of the parenting style, and maybe because of many other factors, let's say many times when they tried something, rather than being rewarded, they got punished for it. So that impacts one's self-esteem, obviously.
Yeah.
So there are various ways to kind of redo that and revise that. And again, it has to do with being able to experience success and being able to get rewarded for not only doing the right thing, but also for when you are not successful, not to see it as black and white as a failure, but as a process of learning and growth. Because if you keep at a skill, for instance, let's say you're learning a new skill, and this is often a good example that is given, is like, if the first time that you tried to walk as a toddler, obviously all of us fell. If
Multiple
you got
times.
so
Yeah.
that you never tried again, it would be terrible, wouldn't it? But
Yeah.
we all try and try and try, and we mostly successful. Now, those experiences, the corrective experience is being rewarded for trying something again and getting rewarded for success. Now, if today someone has low self-esteem, again, it might be because of a variety of issues, but it can be a reward punishment paradigm where their efforts did not really lead to successful reward, and then having a feeling of self-efficacy, the ability to really be able to master certain skills and be able to have success in whether it's relationships, work, academic pursuits, so on. So one of the things we teach people how to get successful at regulating their own physiology. So if you are successful in managing your own body, physiology, your own mindset, and your state of mind, that changes your perception of your own self and your self-esteem. So that's one of the core, I would say, changes that we make with people, is teaching them how to self-regulate.
And so for people that are listening, what are some, because you brought that up before, what are some tips to self-regulate? Is it breathing, meditation?
Great question. So breathing and the type of respiration, and on the internet you can find probably dozens and dozens of different techniques, but respiration, for instance, box breathing, or holding your breath a little bit between kind of breaths, and then having more sustained and having longer, deeper breaths, all of that helps to get people out of that fight or flight response, which seems like a state that a lot of people experience these days.
Yeah.
And that's one form of actually experiencing that. And there are, other methodologies, for instance, just paying attention to one's own physiology. So for instance, where do you have tension in your body? When you get upset, when you get angry, when you're heartbroken, when you are, you feel rejected, where do you feel it in your body? And working with giving your attention to that and working through those, again, using, let's say, respiration, breathing techniques. Meditation is a very good methodology to help self-regulation, to build attention, focus. We actually use brain-computer interface and a methodology called neurofeedback to teach our clients how to do meditate in a different way. The difference is that the problem with meditation, as helpful as it is that most people don't know how to do it.
Yeah,
and when you're doing
that's me.
you don't know whether you're in it or not. Like, am I getting closer? Am I not getting close? Am I doing better? Am I doing worse? So we have actually technology that we have sensors that we put on the scalp. And then we teach people how to know a lot more accurately whether they're in a better meditative state or not, using sound, music, and feedback as methods to reinforce the positive changes that occur during meditative states, relaxation states, and so on.
So did you say medicine before that?
No, meditation.
Oh, meditation. I thought you said medicine. I'm like, there's a magic pill for this. What is it and
No,
how
no.
do you get it?
The best magic pill is to really learn it. But as I mentioned, learning it is not always easy because you don't know what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And it takes years of practice to really learn meditation. But with some of the technology we have developed, we can shorten that time and make the meditative practice much, much deeper. Really, what it is that our nervous system goes into this fight or flight response, as you know, these days, as you know, because of the stressors we have around us,
Oh,
everything that's happening in society, in the world, you know, our deadlines and our lifestyle, and you know, these objects,
yeah.
the phone, the internet, and with everything, we're always on, and we are in constant state of semi-fight or flight, which in our physiology means we are in a sympathetic arousal. It is an okay state to be in for a short time. It is a state that is built into our nervous system to deal with crisis. However, if we stay in this state for a long time, our infrastructure of our brain, our physiology, and our psyche starts to break down. If we are in fight or flight all the time, we deplete our resources emotionally, psychologically, neurologically, and even in terms of our immune system.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. So what we teach using these devices and using these sensors and using real-time brain monitoring, we actually teach people how to learn how to go into what we call parasympathetic state, which allows you to be in more relaxed state, more meditative state. You've probably heard of brain activity from EEG, like alpha state, alpha waves, and theta
Yeah.
waves,
Yeah.
that represent various states of consciousness. And we use real-time brain monitoring, and we use training with these devices to teach people how to get back to those states that are nowadays so difficult to get into.
That's amazing. So what is your thoughts on hypnosis?
Well, I think hypnosis, definitely trance states are a phenomenon that do exist. We are in different trances all the time. We just don't recognize it. And there are certain people who are more susceptible to such states. And there, with training, one can learn how to get better at it. Now, hypnosis, or what I might say, clinical hypnosis, works for some people, and for some other people, it doesn't work as well. But when it does work, it's a good methodology to basically similar to your
Right.
affirmation statement, to really introduce to our psyche and to our subconscious certain suggestions that may be more functional for us. You know, for instance, it is okay to let go, and when you're stressed, it's okay to not be as anxious, or it's okay to let go of muscle tension, or
Yeah.
earlier on in my career, I did a lot of hypnosis with various types of patients. And, sometimes they even regress back to childhood, and, they're able to have access to memories that consciously they did not have access to. And there can be some clinical outcome that's positive. But, on the other hand, I think there's a lot of kind of misnomer and misinformation about how powerful hypnosis is, and it can change everything in one session.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite work like that, but
Right.
it is a good practice to learn how to do self-hypnosis and to be able to put yourself in states that allows you to, for instance, get into a deeper relaxed state, meditative state, or switch back to being in a state where you're hyper-focused, you're much more kind of focused on a task at hand.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. Because there's also a lot of, like if you go to YouTube, there's a lot of like 8 hour sleep hypnosis things that you can kind of play. I've actually listened to some of them. I was like, oh, manifest more wealth, manifest more power. I'm like, okay, let's just
Did
sleep.
it work for you? Did it work for you?
Sometimes you wake up feeling better. I remember sleeping with one years ago, like how to get rid of your thinking of like your ex, because I couldn't figure that out. It was like 8 years ago. And I felt like I kept replaying and replaying, and it did help. I don't know if it just time took over and you just move the F on. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, I mean, I work in personal development, and it's like the power of your thoughts, and your mind creates your reality, and like you look at your bank account and that is a reflection of your thinking, and it all just comes down to the mind, this complex thing that like nobody really understands. And thank God we have people like you that are doing the research and making it easier for us to understand, so we can live a better quality of life. That we just think,
Absolutely.
oh, these things are happening to us, these things are happening to us, in this victim, instead of saying these things are happening for us. Like right before, we got on, an hour before we got on this podcast, I was having a conversation with a friend, and it was about something that I said, you know what, I'm just going to give it to God. I don't feel that I need to put this much stress and mental energy into this. I feel that a lot of it's out of my control. And if this opportunity is meant to be, it will come forward. I think putting all this effort and planning what I'm going to do when I've done everything is just going to push it away. I think I just need to surrender at this exact moment. But it was like this play by play of what you should do versus what you shouldn't do. And sometimes I think the best thing to do is just to surrender and then focus on like calming your body and your mind.
Yeah, that's actually very wise. There aren't too many people who can do that. And it's a very good state of mind to be in, because, frankly, human beings, as much as we like to think, we're not in control of events around us. I mean, we can plan and overplan, and things happen that were not part of our plan. And we need to have the flexibility and the ability to maneuver and reorganize. And that's what human beings have done to survive on this planet. When you think about it, we were not the strongest physically, right?
Right.
And yes, we do have certain intellectual abilities, but it's probably not even our intellect that has allowed us to survive. It's probably our ability to adapt and our
Yes.
ability to keep shifting and changing as circumstances change. So I'm 100% with you on that, in terms of we can't always overplan. Plans are good, certain structures we need to put in place, but we also need to be flexible. In fact, that's one of the principles, I believe, in terms of brain fitness and brain health. One of the most important is, yes, we need brain stability, but we also need emotional and cognitive flexibility. In other words, it's good to have certain structures in place, certain values, certain plans, certain direction, but we also need to be flexible because the way things change in our lives every day, we're not in total control of it. So the best way to do
Yeah.
it is adaptive.
Yeah, I think we have less control than we actually think. And that's where in my life I know that a lot of my stress and mental anxiety came from trying to control situations I couldn't, but thinking I could. So replaying them over and over in my mind, thinking somehow I could change the outcome, or saying, okay, if you say this, if you say that, but it's like all this pressure. And sometimes you just have to let it go and just let things unfold the way they're supposed to, whether you like it or not. You just don't
Absolutely.
know how it's going to work out.
And that ability to let go and shift gears and kind of say, I'm not in control, taps into an area that's very interesting that relates to our conversation, which has to do with people who have more obsessive tendencies and the need to control situations. And that often has a genetic component. In other words, certain brains are hardwired to be more like that. And of course, their experiences may reinforce that as well. So with a lot of patients we see who might have tendencies towards overthinking, rumination, not being able to let go, getting stuck in one way, whether it's relationship or ways of doing things. In fact, with majority, almost all of our patients, we do something called a brain map, quantitative EEG, which is a form of brain mapping that allows us to determine what parts, what networks in the brain are over or underactive. And we often see with people who have more like obsessive tendencies and they have more trouble shifting gears and not being flexible, that certain regions of the brain get kind of, the signal is not where it's supposed to be. And, we kind of see that that part of their brain is overactive or is underactive.
Wow.
And through the process of brain training, again, we're able to teach them how to rewire their brain, not just by thinking or convincing them, but actually practicing lowering the activity in that region of the brain. And that to me is very fascinating,
Wow.
how we're actually able to do that. And the result is that they become more flexible, less controlling, and more able to maneuver and adapt to situations. Whereas people who have a hard time with that, they kind of corner themselves into situations where it's less adaptive for them, for sure.
Yeah. And so on average, like how many sessions does it take till somebody really can kind of break those patterns and set themselves free?
It really depends on whether this is a clinical disorder or it's just a mild tendency, but someone who has a clinical disorder may be coming in for sessions for 6 months to a year, and doing a couple of sessions a week. But sometimes someone, let's say, who's not dealing with a clinical disorder, they just have some tendencies towards that, might be a lot less than that.
Yeah, it's just it's so fascinating how just our thoughts and our mind dictate how we feel, how we operate, how we think. It's just something that I think that we'll continue doing research and we'll never fully figure it out until we die. And we're like,
Well,
wait, that wasn't
we
so
can,
hard. Why did we overthink everything?
we definitely can learn more and more every day.
Oh,
I think that, yeah.
it's crazy. So, okay, so where can people find more information about you, contact you to become a patient, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so we are on the Upper West Side here in New York City, the Brain Resource Center. It's brainresourcecenter.com, not the research, because a lot of people type it in as research. It's brainresourcecenter.com.
Okay.
So we're on the Upper West Side, and we see a variety of clients from both children and adults. With children, it's often things like ADD, ADHD. We have a lot of parents who want to basically take their kids off medication. They may be on Ritalin or some stimulants, or they might have some mild kind of behavioral issues, even, mild to moderate autism or on spectrum. We treat some of that. In terms of adults, it's usually things like anxiety, depression, stress, sleep issues. We do treat people with concussion, brain injury, even stroke. And then we have people who are more concerned about things like memory, even though they may not have, let's say, Alzheimer's, but they still feel a little bit concerned about, that their memory and their cognition is not as sharp. We test, and we also help with the methodologies we use to improve that. We also have people who go through various stages of life and changes, including actually menopause, when women go through obviously hormonal changes, mood changes, cognitive changes, those things occur. So we help that population. And then we have another population where they have no symptoms. They're just interested in brain health, brain fitness, longevity, and they just want to be better at whatever it is they're doing. So for instance, they want to be, let's say they are professional athletes, or they are CEOs, or they are people who have high pressure jobs that they're dealing with, a lot of pressure and stress, but they also want to optimize their performance in whatever skill set they're dealing with, and we help them as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, so you're a resource for everybody. As long as you have a brain, then you're a client. So it's a good thing everyone has a brain.
That's why we call it the Brain Resource Center.
Exactly. And I was just like thinking when I said everyone has a brain, it's like some people operate like they don't, but we do. Well, this was great. So yeah, you guys definitely check them out if you are not in New York City. Well, the good news is there's a plane. Take a plane or a train or drive there and go and visit him.
We've had people come to us from other states or even other countries, and they come in, we do some assessment, brain mapping, neuropsych testing, and then we're able to actually do a bunch of our work remotely once they come in, and we establish kind of their baseline, their brain dynamics. Some of the work can be done remotely.
Oh, well, good to know. So yeah, well, this is amazing. So if you're looking to improve your life, get over a relationship, increase your memory and everything else he said, and make a ton of money, well, I think we just found the guy. So thank you so much, Dr. Kamran. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule.
I appreciate your questions and talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. And thanks to everybody wherever you're listening. We'll see you next time to find out who's next.
Hey, your host here, Madison Malloy. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms, and please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@nexttomadison.com. I thank you again for listening. Bye.